World War II didn't just start with a single shot. It was more like a fire that had been smoldering for a whole decade, fueled by all this tension, ambition, and aggression all over the globe. So today, we're going to dig into its really complex origins. 80 million. That is the staggering estimated number of lives lost during the war. A cost so immense, it completely reshaped our world. It led to new superpowers, brand new technologies, and honestly, new global anxieties that we're still living with today.
So, how did the deadliest conflict in human history actually begin? Well, the answer is way more complicated than just the invasion of Poland in 1939. The path to war was actually paved years earlier, on totally different continents, driven by separate but equally destructive ambitions. To get it, we really have to look at these two stories.
Yeah, you really have to think of it this way. It wasn't one single global war from the get-go. It was two separate storms gathering force. You had one over in Asia and another one in Europe. And for years, they just raged on their own before finally, catastrophically, merging into one global firestorm. And, our story doesn't start in Europe like you might think. We have to go back a full decade earlier to a place called Manchuria, where the Empire of Japan lit the very first spark of a conflict that would eventually just engulf the entire continent. So on September 18th, 1931, Japan pulled off what was honestly a textbook false flag operation. This little explosion, it was a total ruse planned by the Japanese army itself. They needed an excuse, a justification for invading and seizing Manchuria, a territory they desperately wanted for its rich resources. Okay, so what you're looking at here is this critical fork in the road for Japan. As a rapidly industrializing island nation, they had almost no natural resources. So they had two choices. Either go the route of aggressive expansion and just take the resources they needed, or try to cooperate with other Asian nations to push back against the Western colonial powers. Well, after a string of political assassinations took out the moderates, the radical pro-war military faction won out. And that set Japan on a direct path of conquest. So the League of Nations condemns Japan for its actions, right? And what does Japan do? They just walk out. They chose to be a diplomatic outcast rather than compromise. And with no one to check their power, their military launched a full-scale invasion of China in 1937. But, despite early wins like capturing the capital, China is just so vast. And surprisingly, the nationalists and communists teamed up, bogging the Japanese army down in a brutal, grinding stalemate. This number, it represents one of the most horrific episodes of the entire war. When the Japanese captured the Chinese capital of Nanjing, their troops unleashed a period of just unbelievable mass murder and war crimes. In just a matter of weeks, up to 300,000 civilians and unarmed soldiers were killed. All right, so now let's hop over to the other side of the world and see how a parallel storm was brewing in Europe, this one driven by an ideology of racial supremacy and, well, pure conquest. Rising from the ashes of World War I and economic collapse, Adolf Hitler's vision was built on this one powerful concept, Lebensraum. It's German for living space. He argued that for Germany to be truly strong, it needed more land for its people. And this meant conquering Eastern Europe, displacing what he called its inferior Slavic populations, and seizing all their resources. It was a terrifying idea that basically framed mass murder and war as a biological necessity. For years, Hitler just kept pushing the envelope, right? He was testing the will of the European powers who were so desperate to avoid another war that they just kept trying to appease him. But with every single step, remilitarizing the Rhineland, annexing Austria, taking parts of Czechoslovakia, it became crystal clear his ambitions were limitless. The invasion of Poland was just the final straw. Now, to achieve these goals, Hitler knew he couldn't get bogged down in grinding trench warfare like in the last war. So the German army perfected this terrifying new doctrine, Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. This wasn't about slow attrition. This was about speed, shock, and just overwhelming force, designed to cause a rapid and total collapse of the enemy. And the effectiveness of Blitzkrieg? Absolutely devastating. Poland fell in just 3 weeks. France, which everyone expected to hold out for months, collapsed in only 6. By June of 1940, Hitler's armies had just swept across Western Europe, and he was literally posing for photos by the Eiffel Tower. So by the summer of 1940, only Great Britain remained defiant. They were protected by the English Channel, and the pilots of the Royal Air Force fought off the German Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain, saving the island from invasion and earning this immortal praise from their prime minister. With Britain holding firm, Hitler made a fateful decision. He turned east. In June of 1941, he launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. And this decision, it would prove fatal. The fighting on the Eastern Front was just apocalyptic. It ultimately cost the Soviets 25 million lives and completely shattered the myth of German invincibility.
So, by late 1941, you've got these two massive wars raging across the globe, but they're not really one war. Not yet. The final act was about to begin, where these two fires would finally converge.
So let's just recap where we are. Over in Asia, Japan is bogged down in the seemingly endless fight in China. And in Europe, Germany controls this vast empire but is bleeding itself dry in the Soviet Union. Both sides are locked in these incredibly brutal stalemates, which is just setting the stage for one final global escalation. The final piece of this puzzle was the United States, still isolated and on the sidelines. Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor would provide the catalyst, finally dragging America into the fight and transforming two regional wars into a true world war.